come on, we'll come in with it.
Compared with the weapons of a previous generation of Australian infantrymen, the new technology is almost science fiction. But the Australian soldier of the future will soon recognise the F-88 Steyr as general issue.
The standard F-88, okay? As you can see, it's it looks very spacey, space-agey, which is good. I like it. It's a very good weapon.
The Steyr is already in service undergoing trials with 6th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment in Queensland. Most soldiers have seen or heard of the weapon, but for many, firing it is still a new experience. Well, Corporal, what do you think of the Steyr?
I think it's excellent. I can actually hit a target now. It's great. It really is excellent.
Well, it's compact, light, and mostly made of plastic, and in many respects resembles a child's toy, which it most definitely isn't. But in one significant respect, hitting the target is closer to child's play than ever before. Well, here goes.
Okay, get the weapon down range. Put your air and text them on. Okay, bring the weapon up into the shoulder. Identify your target at the front. Instant. In your own time, go on.
And if an untrained civilian can hit the target in one easy lesson, the implications for trained infantry are enormous.
It's easier to disassemble and reassemble. There are fewer working parts. There are many things that this weapon has that the current weapons don't have. So I would say yes, it's definitely a quantum leap in technology.
The Steyr uses standard NATO calibre ammunition along with another weapon about to come into service, the Minimi machine gun. It's half the weight of its predecessor, the M16. It too is easier to maintain and deadly accurate. It's expected that the Steyr will come into service with battalions in Townsville at the end of the year and be phased into other regiments over the following 18 months. Tom Hilston, NBN News. The first Edgeworth Scout Group venturers want to visit Tasmania so badly they're doing nothing about it. They've decided to sit around for 72 hours until they raise the money they need to pay for airfares and accommodation at the 8th Australian venture in Launceston in January next year. But they're sitting, and they're sitting, 4 metres off the ground on poles. The venturers have endured 2 days and nights perched in their uncomfortable but eye-catching quarters, and they say the effort is paying off in donations and sponsorship. The venturers need to raise more than $3,500 to make their scouting trip of a lifetime. They'll stay sitting on their poles until 10 o'clock tomorrow, ending a fundraising vigil.
Neighbours raised the alarm at 1 o'clock when smoke was seen billowing from the Bryant Street house. It's the second fire in the derelict Fibro Timber building this year, and fire officers fear it may have been deliberately lit.
We consider it to be suspicious. It appears that there were some children or small people seen in the building.
While firemen donned breathing apparatus to fight the blaze, neighbours warned of a continuing threat. 20-year resident Jim Smith says the old house is a fire trap.
Stuff like this has been standing there for 5 years in a deteriorating condition, it could produce a fire that could destroy half the house along this block because they're all timber construction.
The fire was controlled within 30 minutes, the interior of the house completely gutted. Locals have called for the building to be demolished.
Nothing can prepare an individual or a community for sudden tragic loss, but Newcastle has learned to cope with more than its share of disaster aftermath.
The way things have been going around Newcastle, we were ready for anything. We didn't actually anticipate it, but we were ready for it.
The Earthquake Counselling Centre was one of the first offices to be reoccupied in quake-devastated Beaumont Street. Since January, it's dealt with hundreds of cases and was starting to scale down operations just before the bus crash that claimed 6 local lives and left 26 other people injured.
I guess the good news is that we are here and it's very easy to swing into action and be available for anyone who has a need now.
The centre has put on extra staff to help with information and advice on locating relatives, but that's only where the job begins.
I guess that's when we will be looking at the need for counselling. I believe that a move will be made fairly quickly for some of the people to return to Newcastle.
Newcastle's Disaster Welfare Centre was also set up after the earthquake. It's processed thousands of cases for financial assistance since then, and it's now helping the relatives of bus crash victims trying to get to Queensland with money for travel and accommodation.
We haven't got any firm plans for any one case. We tend to look at each case as it comes along and judge it on its merits.
The aircraft refuellers strike is only one problem compounding travel arrangements.
Understandably, there's some people who would like to go up there and more or less feel they would have to travel by coach, but in view of what's happened, they're a bit reluctant.
Some of the bus crash survivors are due home tonight. Andrew Lobb reporting for NBN News.
And around the outside goes Trelaw, in, loses passenger. Davies comes right up on the inside, Watson's gone!
Sound, excitement, smell and human endurance pushed to the limit in the name of fun. Thousands of fans will again venture to the Motordrome to see their heroes and villains of 4 and 2 wheels dice with death for the love of motor racing. Super sedan driver John Brown will campaign an East Coast modified hot rod as well as his car this year, and he's wrapped with a change of vehicle.
Yeah, we've only had one practice in it, but we've put in pretty good time, so I think we should be fairly competitive.
Mel Guy has won New South Wales titles on solo bikes and in rally cars. Now he's switching his hand to the demanding but incredibly quick leader sports car, with one purpose in mind, another championship.
You know, I want to get a lot bigger in this sport if I can and go up and show the Queenslanders how it's done. Up until now, they've been showing us.
Love him or hate him, you can't deny Super Sedan champion John Pine can steer a car around any circuit in the country. Piney only has 2 paces, stop and flat out, and he just hates losing. This year, due to regulation changes, Pine will race a Commodore, and he was all smiles after today's practice.
And just today it feels so magic out there, even on a bit of a slick track. It feels like it's got to go, and I think we'll be heading for the future of checkered flag, I hope.
With a break in the weather and some dry tracks, it could be the best season on record.
Well, I think it's probably going to be one of the best ones we've ever had for a long time. You know, the type of cars and the standard of workmanship in them and the calibre of drivers we're getting through the ranks is probably never been unequalled as far as the 4-wheel division goes. And we don't have to say too much about 2-wheelers with Todd Wilshire and the likes of those type of riders in the area. Perfect.
Yes, what a cup pointer by the Phantom today, who started at 5-1, Raw Creation at 80-1 and 4-1 Zubil, unplaced favourite at 15-8 Stylish Century. At Gosford today, the Carlton Spring Cup over 1,600 metres. Three to 1 equal favourite, 3-1 equal favourite and 10-1.
Engineers from the Federal Road Safety Council believe the bus driver was within a whisker of saving his passengers. The vehicle had almost stopped before it rolled off Henry Roberts Drive. Chief Investigator Mike Kimberley says the coach fell only 4 metres down the embankment, not 30 as initially estimated. What caused the KJN coach to lose control is still a mystery. At the Alderley Police Depot today, a similar bus underwent a brake test on a special machine from New South Wales before the wreck was hoisted for intensive examinations. Investigators say some insight has been gleaned, certainly enough to look further, but it's not conclusive.
This further test will be done at a later stage with a view to the overall performance on the brakes.
All 38 survivors of Tuesday's accident were injured. Mr. Kimberley is convinced their injuries were caused as the top of the coach gave way, seats broke free and were hurled through the cabin.
Very little strength on the hoops that go over the top.
He says the federal government has targeted 1992 for the introduction of new standards for bus construction. Hampering the investigation, the serious condition and continued hospitalisation of many passengers and the bus driver, unable to be questioned, still in intensive care.
At the Gold Coast Hospital, those who'd made it safely down the mountain were continuing their recovery. Describing himself as very sore but happy to be alive, 62-year-old Doug Woodward from Newcastle said he had no idea anything was wrong until it was too late.
I was sitting in the bus talking to my wife and we were looking out the window. The next minute I heard the driver call out. I knew it was a sort of a warning, and then he just moved off the road and rolled down the embankment.
Nursing a broken collarbone, shattered ribs and 2 compressed vertebrae, Doug Woodward said he's looking forward to seeing his wife, now in intensive care at PA in Brisbane. 25 patients tonight remain in the Gold Coast Hospital, including 3 in intensive care. Some are expected to be discharged as early as tomorrow.
It was another day of frustration, a day when Perth was virtually isolated, with Australian Airlines East Coast flights faring little better. Normally, Australian operates 40 services out of Sydney. Today, there were just 7, 4 to Queensland and 3 to Melbourne. No fuel. At Ansett, there was little fuel, but enough to schedule 26 flights from Sydney. Both carriers had hoped for much better after last night's Industrial Commission hearing in Perth ordered an immediate return to work by transport workers. The union is likely to agree, but not before observing today's public holiday in Melbourne.
We can't have national meetings until Friday morning.
So the travelling public will be inconvenienced for another 2 days?
I don't know, will they?
I find that quite incredible, really. You know, when there's so many people waiting around that they just can't get their act together just because it's a public holiday.
Per Christensen and his wife now risk missing their daughter's wedding in Western Australia, stranded by union action that's costing the airlines millions, not to mention Australia's reputation.
This is the 3rd time out of 4 trips over here that we've had problems.
I hate to tell you what people overseas are saying.
While Ansett won't admit it, its ability to refuel at ports such as Coolangatta and even Brisbane is the reason it's able to maintain some flights on the East Coast. But that lifeline will end if the refuelers decide to stay out tomorrow.
We'd have to look at the law of diminishing returns and say perhaps 10 or 15% on Friday. Saturday doesn't look good.
That translates to a complete shutdown by the weekend, if not sooner.
In the past couple of years, the Lake Macquarie Games have built in stature thanks to the hard work of Cliff Marsh and the Lake Macquarie Council, and one of their premier events each year is the triathlon. A 1.5 kilometre swim followed by a 40k bike ride and a 10k run is enough to shake the hardiest of cobwebs from the mind on any Sunday, and at 8 a.m. this Sunday it's on again. Last year's winner Greg Welsh, the newly crowned world champion, is still overseas and won't be able to take part, but it still is a very strong field, especially the ladies' event.
Makeely Jones has just come back from the world titles in Florida and she's coming back up to race, as is her twin sister, so it'll be interesting to see how those two go. Louise Bonham is racing also and she finished 9th in the world titles 2 years ago. She's just coming back from injury.
And the course itself is not the easiest.
It's a demanding course on the bike league particularly. The hills out around Bolton Point will certainly sort the cyclists out. The run's fairly flat, but you have to be able to run when you get off the bike.
Any tips?
I think Chris Southwell will probably win the men's race, and I'd be surprised if Makeely Jones gets beaten in the women's race.
It's the first time in more than 6 years that the giant Rundle's clothing factory has contemplated closing down, even for a brief period. It's understood the 420 employees opted to take 4 days without pay to avoid retrenchments among staff during a seasonal slump in trade. Company Managing Director Peter Rundle said the factory would effectively remain idle from Monday's public holiday until the following Monday, during which time old stock could be reduced. He blamed high interest rates and a lack of consumer confidence for the trading lull, but predicted an upswing when employees returned from their unpaid break as the industry prepared for the Christmas peak.
Three years of heavy rain has left the Shire's roads in an appalling condition, and the $36,000 survey carried out by the Hunter Valley Research Foundation was a chance for residents to air their views. Though only around 10 to 15% of residents agreed on other issues, a staggering 90% said roads were the major problem, and that's enough to make council act.
Council obviously now will have to look at its funding and the percentage it spends on roads and try wherever possible to increase the funds on roads. We'll also have to contact the state government because a lot of the bad roads and the ones of which we get bad reports are main roads which are funded by the state government, so it's a dual operation.
The report recommends that council develop a roads strategy and keep the public fully informed. This lack of communication was also highlighted in the survey. Residents with a poor perception of council were those who knew little of its operations. This too is something council aims to change.
The council might just engage some experts to map out a program for it on how best it may overcome this communication situation.
Residents also clearly said they wanted no high-rise development on the waterfront to be above 6 storeys, and they felt education was an important issue to the Shire. And though they didn't mind more residential, retail and small tourist developments, they didn't want heavy industry or more office accommodation. Rebecca Skinner, NBN News.
The Chamber surveyed a depressed manufacturing sector throughout the state. In the Hunter, 46% of firms recorded a drop in business in the September quarter. Only 22% recorded an improvement.
Well, unfortunately, this is the worst result on record in the 6 years we've been doing the survey for New South Wales as a whole and for this region in particular.
The Chamber noted increased imports, higher wages, a hike in raw material costs as reasons for the recession, and predictions of worsening conditions in the next quarter mean tight times for the labour market.
About 24% of the firms on balance that we surveyed suggested that they would have to cut staff. And in the Hunter, that was the second quarter in succession that they said that to us. So that might add up to a lean Christmas for a number of people.
To fight this trend, 86% of companies surveyed have instigated training programs to keep staff moving with new technologies. Despite a high Australian dollar, there is some relief for manufacturers with encouraging signs in export sales. 20% of firms surveyed noted increases, the biggest climb in 6 years. The BHP has doubled its manufacturing exports in the last 12 months.
From our point of view, because the domestic market has slipped so badly for steel products nationally and right across Australia, we not only have planned exports, but we've got exports because the domestic market is down.
General Manager of BHP's Rod and Bar Division, Rob Chenery, says except for a strong mining industry, the entire Australian economy is in recession. And Mr Chenery says governments must reorganise macroeconomic policies.
We need increased productivity and we need lower interest rates in Australia to get this economy working properly again.
After 45 years of occupation, Germany has become a united sovereign state. East and West were officially joined at midnight local time amid wild celebrations.
For all the news, join us tonight at 6. The Council will seek permission from Local Government Minister David Hay to ignore the new land valuations and use the 1981 figures to set next year's rates, an idea which was first mooted on Newsnight last week by Mayor Ivan Welsh.
We should tell the state government that we are not going to use this year's valuations because they're disproportionately high throughout the city in certain parts. They don't benefit anybody, they don't benefit one sector against the other. All they do is cause a fear or a panic, if you like, with the people that have been hit with these super enormous rates, because they're a monstrous increase. As I say, one man down there is going to be charged rates which are half his pension.
Local state members will be asked to support a council delegation to meet the minister to discuss the issue. Although Mr Hay has still to officially respond to the request, a spokesperson for his office said that there is no capacity under the Local Government Act for councils to refuse to use the new valuations for rating purposes. Council has until Christmas to strike the new rates. While the battle continues with the state government, residents around the lake whose rates could triple in line with their new property assessments can only watch and wait. Jodie McKay for NBN News.